Now we're going live. Now we're going live. Okay, so welcome everyone to this new episode. Today's subject is making your brand and product convey feelings with Jeff Burton. First of all, Jeff is a friend. We're both the same age, right, Jeff?
We're pretty close.
All right. Apart from Jeff truly being a friend, he also co-founded Electronic Arts, which brings EA Sports, the first gaming computer publishing company currently valued at $32 billion. Their tagline became extremely well known around the world, and we owe his team thanks for the fantastic emotions we feel while playing FIFA, Sims, and more. Jeff will walk us through their early days, how everything started with some marketer friends, and how with no internet and with no television, or television being so expensive for a young startup, their games managed to be in every store and evoke emotions in any person who played them. For those who stay until the end, Jeff Burton will be available to answer any of your questions, so use the chat to start asking questions now. If you like the video podcast, please feel free to invite people to join us by sharing the link and give us a thumbs up here on YouTube. So, welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Santiago. It's great to see you.
So, Jeff, everyone here wants to listen to you, and this is going to be also then in iTunes, Spotify, and some other platforms. But what about starting with you telling us why EA was so disruptive?
Well, we were disruptive because we went against the norm in almost every way. Back then in 1982, when we first started, first of all, not one of us was a game programmer that started the company. We were all more marketing executives at the time at Apple, and I was at Atari in charge of Europe and the Middle East for home computers. One of our CEO was Trip Hawkins, and he had been at Apple for a few years. He joined it in his second year when we got out of business school, and he ended up being in the marketing manager for the Lisa, which was an early attempt by Apple to gain access to the business computing market. It didn't succeed very well, partly because Steve Jobs was removed from running that team, and he then, as everyone knows, he started the kind of skunk works inside Apple to create the Macintosh, which was basically a direct competition and more of a home machine than the Lisa was, and it was, of course, a lot less expensive. Lisa was an expensive microcomputer for offices to buy. But anyway, what we did, we came from backgrounds that were basically marketing backgrounds. So unlike any other of the software companies or most of the other software companies that existed at the time, we didn't know how to code anything. And we scoured the country looking for independent developers whose works we could publish. We based our marketing strategy on modeling the record industry, the recording industry. So our contracts, we invited one of the partners that had founded A&M Records, Jerry Moss. It was Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss that created A&M Records, the label. So what we did was we got Jerry Moss to join our board, and then he was able to advise us on aspects of contracts with recording artists and marketing of in the music industry. And so we kind of picked up a lot of cues from that industry. And we wanted to make our the programmers who created the games we published, we wanted them to become famous. And that was unlike anybody was doing in the industry at the time. It was anonymous people in large hardware companies that were creating the software for the hardware that was being sold, and nobody knew who they were, and they weren't celebrated in any way. They were just 9-to-5 workers. We wanted to build a personality behind the people who were the ones that were creating these interesting and compelling software games, and putting their emotions into it, their hearts into it. And so that made us kind of contrarians. We also wanted to sell our products directly to retailers, which at that time nobody was doing. The software industry was all done through distributors, nationwide, well, regional distributors, and we just refused to join that business model, putting another layer between us and consumers, having to go through a distributor, and also losing the amount of margin that you do when you go to distributors. So we went straight to the retailers. That was unusual back then. So it made us kind of disruptive in the industry.
Wow, it's been a long journey, right?
Yeah, 38 years, something like that. Yeah.
Wow. And so, Jeff, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and you mentioned so the company is from scratch until today that is doing, I think it's like $5 billion a year. So in this long journey, how were those early days?
Well, it was back in 1982. There weren't that many. There really weren't that many startups. I mean, Silicon Valley was a place of startups for sure, but there weren't hundreds and hundreds of them like there are today, more like thousands today. Back then, it was not quite as crowded a field, and so we pulled to we came together, 6 of us from different companies: Apple, Atari, Visicorp, and that was it. We were all Stanford graduates. Some of us had we were all in our 30s, except one of us, who was in his 40s, and Tripp was in his 20s. So we ranged the 20 to 40 something. And one of us was a physics undergraduate major. Tripp had an undergraduate major of strategy gaming at Harvard. Bing, Tripp, Bing, and I were business school classmates at Stanford. Bing was an English major. I was an anthropology major. And then we had another couple of kind of engineering types. One was computer science, but wasn't a programmer per se. Well, you have to be a programmer to do computer science, but she wasn't a game producer at all. And then the other guy from Stanford was a mechanical engineering master's degree, undergraduate and master's degree. So you can see that what we knew best, I think, was had a good feel for how to pick the right games, the ones that were so that could bring more depth and feeling to the experience with a computer, which was our kind of mission.
Yeah, nice. And you once told me that you were kind of deciding at first if you were doing either software or hardware. You had that conversation at the very beginning. I remember you told me.
Tripp called. Yeah. Tripp had left Apple. And he called me and said, if you were going to do a startup, what would you be in the software industry, or would it be a startup in the software or hardware industry? And I said software, definitely, because having been at Atari, I was aware of how difficult and expensive it was to manufacture and distribute and sell the hardware. Back then, the Atari made mostly cartridge software. And even with their computers, there was no monitor involved. You had to hook up to a television screen, and there were 4 standards in the world for televisions. So you had to make sure that you had the right standard base unit shipping to the various areas of the world that use different standards. So it was all complicated. Tripp agreed. I mean, that was his thought in the first place. And then he gathered together 5 of us, along with him. We had dinner at his house in July of 1982. He had a housekeeper named Nelda, I believe was her name, and she cooked dinner for us. And we all went over and spent a long time at his home that evening, figuring out, well, first getting to know each other, because Tripp Bing and I knew each other from business school. Rich Melman, Dave Evans, and Pat Marriott. Rich had been vice president of Visicorp and vice president of marketing for Visicorp. And Dave and Pat had worked with Tripp at Apple. So, all of us knew 1 or 2 of the other people in the group, but not everybody knew everybody else. So, except Tripp.
And
so
that's
the time.
You went straight forward to raise money from, was Sequoia, right? One of your first.
Well, first of all, we had dinner. We tried to get to know each other, and I thought it was the most talented group I'd ever been a part of. So there was no way I wasn't going to go with this startup, even though not that many people were doing that at the time. And about a month later, in August, Tripp called all of us, the 5 others of us, and said, if you're ready to leave your executive position right now, we can start in August. I'm going to put up the money. He had a lot of Apple stock, so he had plenty of funding to do seed funding for the company. And he said, I can cover with investment, people's salaries so that they can move from their current jobs and we can start this company. And I said, I remember on the phone, well, I'm really interested. I think it's great idea. I loved the people that were involved, but I'm not. I'm kind of a little bit worried about doing a startup at this moment. I had a mortgage and a house in Los Altos and a wife, no kids at the time. But and he said, okay, well, think about it. But I just want you to know that all the other people that were at dinner have already agreed to join this startups. Make it happen. And I said, okay, well, I'm in. I decided I better not hesitate at all. And of course, later we all found out that he told everybody the same thing. And back then there was no internet, and we didn't know each other well enough to have our phone numbers readily available. So none of us called anybody else and said, hey, did you agree to leave and start? So that was a interesting tactic on the part of Tripp to get us all to buy into this idea of starting a company. And so then we started, and we wrote a business plan. It was 100 pages long. That was what was required back then. And Don Valentine did say that it was the best business plan he'd read at that time. It was very detailed. Tripp was adamant about having a very complete business plan. We all contributed some pieces, but he kind of made the thing in his voice. And so we were able to raise $5 million from 3 top-tier venture firms in the Valley. It was Sequoia Capital was one of them, Don Valentine. Seven Rosen was another, when Ben Rosen was a well-known investor at the time, and Seven Rosen was a significant and top-tier firm. And then Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers was the other significant VC firm that we allowed to invest. There were 3 or 4 others that wanted to invest, and we said, no, we're going to limit it to 3. And the ones that we didn't select were pissed off for years at me. So I knew some of them from undergraduate at Stanford and stuff, and they were angry that we wouldn't let them invest, but we wanted just 3. And so that was an amazing thing, because we started in August and early September. We got our funding in November. So that was a very short lead time for raising $5 million, which in today's dollars, $5 million is about equivalent to 20 million, something like that. And as an A round, Tripp had provided a seed round of I don't know how much, maybe $300,000 or $400,000, I don't remember. And then the venture firm, Don Valentine didn't want to invest. We wanted him to be the lead investor, but he said, no, you're asking, it's far too rich a deal. You're asking too high a valuation. And so Brooke Byers at Kleiner Perkins said, Kleiner will take the whole deal. Well, then Don Valentine, of course, wanted in on it. So he said, okay, I'm in too. So it was one of those interesting things that happens sometimes in venture capital funding rounds. It takes one to agree. If nobody else wants to join, we'll take the whole deal. And that then pulls in other investors. But we got the investors we wanted. And that's unusual. I've not seen, well, that's not true. In recent years, there have been some venture funding that has happened quickly. Most of the time it's related to, it's because the people that are starting a company have founded other companies successfully previous to going out for funding now. Back then, none of us at Electronic Arts had started a company. I was the only one in the group that was involved with a game-related company, Atari, and none of us had started a company from scratch. So that was a very unusual ability we seemed to have to get the funding in within 2-3 months.
Wow.
Doesn't happen anymore.
No. And Jeff, I was thinking in the company's manifesto, the mission was very clear. And I know we have some creative people hearing us. Mm-hmm. So you guys wanting to help people feel and get emotional by your games. What was the idea or concept you work around?
I think it was Tripp that coined a phrase that we all adopted because it was appropriate for the kinds of products that we wanted to put out in the marketplace. And it was a 3-word description of the product: simple, hot, and deep. And so we all adopted that as sort of the simple, hot, and deep, criteria for software. We also decided early on that we were not going to produce game cartridges, primarily because the storage capacity on a game cartridge back then just wasn't adequate to make a simple, hot, and deep game. So we were dedicated to 5 1/4-inch floppy disks. That was our medium that we started out on, and that was a little bit ahead of the market a little bit, but a lot of people came in. We helped promote or generate hardware sales because people wanted to play the games that we had created. I can remember. We had some fascinating games. One was a pinball construction set. Bill Budge was the creator of that, and he started this simple game. It was a construction set to make a game, a pinball game. So you could drag and drop pinball parts and pieces onto a pinball sort of platform or field, if you will, and then you could activate them and play a pinball game that you had created yourself. So you could swap them with friends and have friends, try out your pinball machine game that you'd created. That was kind of a neat idea because it was using, of course, the whole drag and drop capability. And we used it later on for a music construction set and video construction set. We had a whole series of construction sets that were sort of innovative at the time, using the capability of computers to allow people to make their own worlds, and you've seen that kind of follow throughout the history of electronics, including through Sims and that kind of stuff. We didn't create Sims; we bought the company that did that. But yeah, it was one of the things that there's a quotation that I like. It's fairly simple, but it was said by. It's a famous quote by Maya Angelou, who was an author and poet that won a lot of, you know, prizes. And in fact, she got the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She's now deceased, but one of the things that she said that I think is important, and because it really expresses what I believe, and her quote was, I'm going to read it so that I'm sure that I get it right. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that was what we were trying to do, was create a feeling with each product that we put out there. So, and people haven't forgotten the feeling that they get from the games that we have proliferated. They may forget some of the details of the games and some of the older ones, but there's a distinct feeling that each one of them had, as just sort of their the basis of the product, and that's unforgettable with the games. And so that was where that's what we tried to promote, was having people get a feeling from playing the game. Sometimes involved with characters in the game, but you know, I think that's true today as well. You know, it's true in life. You know, when I meet 1,000 people a year, and I don't remember most of them, but you know, if I'm asked about somebody, lots of times I don't remember what we said to each other, but I remember the feeling I got from them. You know, so I know, I remember, oh yeah, that was a good guy, or that was a really sharp woman. I don't remember much else about them. I just remember the feeling that I got from them.
Yeah.
And I think that's valid, still today. So emotions, you know, we are 90% of all of our decisions that we make are made in the realm of our brains that are tied to emotions.
Yeah.
So emotion, we live on emotion, essentially, and the logical side of our brain spends which is about 10% of the process of making a decision and doing things. About 10% of that it's fully dedicated to justifying the emotional decision that we've already made.
Yeah.
You know? So it's explaining why, you know, in rational terms, this emotional decision that we made not purely, but the majority of the aspect of making the decision or having a feel, it was based on emotions. It's crucial.
And you started talking about emotions and feelings, and that's what the name of this episode. Before that, I want to remind everyone that if you're liking
in a matter of days,
the
entire world
went
into lockdown. Workers.
Sorry.
Remind everyone that if you are liking the podcast, you can give a thumbs up, and you can invite people to join by sharing the link. And at the end, we will have 20 minutes for Q&A. I've seen that people are already starting to ask some questions.
Okay.
So, Jeff, coming back to the emotion thing, I mean, everyone wants Jeff Burton advice, right? So what are some ways that could help everyone communicate and convey feelings better?
Well, first of all, I think it is, one needs to accept the fact and understand that we are all emotional beings. And so, and what motivates us and gets us moving on anything is an emotional attachment, an emotional tag or cue in our lives. And so you know, it's what's interesting to me too is that in the past the past couple of months, I've been starting to interview millennial generation, Gen X, people who are in their 30s, basically, and trying to get their reactions out of, you know, to their reactions to the current circumstances in the world, and their futures, and their the businesses that they're involved in. Most of them are startup people. And what's amazing to me, or really interesting to me, is that young people today are much more in tune with what's important to them, their value system, how they feel about working and creating a work-life balance. And so they're also taking this opportunity during the crisis in the world that we are enduring. They're taking it as an opportunity to reevaluate what they're doing with their lives and where they're heading and what they think the future is going to be. They're mostly optimistic, but they're rethinking, what do they want to be when they grow up? And they're already grown, of course, but they're having to look down the road and rethink, what went wrong with in the world that exacerbated the situation we're in right now, and what are the values that are important to them. And so cueing on those things, zeroing in on those aspects of our feelings about things is essential these days for anybody who's doing any kind of thinking about how to market and promote companies or products or services. Yeah. It's funny to me how much it is basically a draw, kind of comes down to an emotional appeal, and it needs to be current. That's the thing too.
And Jeff, at that time, there was no internet. TV advertising was very expensive for a young startup. And from what I learned, you did not use radio to advertise EA. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't describe a game, a video game on the radio. So
how did you guys manage to have all your video games in every store of the world without TV, internet, radio? How did you guys do it?
Well, one of the things that we, as I said, we declined to put our products into distribution channels. So we went directly to retailers, and the way we started out, we had about 7 products that we released in our first product release in about May or June of 1983. What we did was the executives in the company divided up the United States and went out for 2 to 3 weeks to the region of the country we had volunteered to go to. I took Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Arizona, and New Mexico, sort of the Southwest kind of. And we went to the major cities, flew into the major cities, rented a car, got a map of the city and a telephone book, Yellow Pages, and we looked up computer stores.
Wow.
They were mostly mom and pop stores. And we would go cold call by ourselves to every computer store. We'd map out the right route as best we could. We didn't have any programs or apps that would tell us which to go, which one's path to follow. But we would end up spending about a day in every major city, going to as many computer stores as we could during working hours. And I'd walk into a mom and pop computer store that was selling a lot of chips and that kind of stuff, along with software. That's where people got software. And I'd walk in and say, I'm Jeff Burton from Electronic Arts. And the owner would say, electronic parts? That's what we mostly sold, And I said, no, this is a software gaming company. And, they weren't that excited, except when I pulled out the packages of our software, which looked like small record albums, really high-end design packaged fronts and backs, and they were shrink wrapped and really sparkling looking. You know, they were unusual. They look like old record albums, but in with the current graphics and stuff. We had a design firm called Steinhilber Deutsch and Guard in San Francisco that did a lot of the package design for us. Anyway, we as soon as I pulled those products out, the store owner would say, "Oh, I've got to have those." They didn't know what they were, you know, they didn't know how to play or anything, but they loved the way the packaging was, because most of the software they sold was in, you know, plastic baggies or something like that.
And they paid for the game up front?
Sorry?
They paid for the game up front?
Oh no, we'd bill them, but well, in fact, I only had samples to show them, so I wasn't distributing at the product at the time, but I was writing up orders. And so I'd say, okay, how many of these? We had 7 titles. How many of these do you want to get in your first order? I'll call in the order and we'll ship them from California. And they said, how about 1 to show and 1 to go? I thought, oh, great. 2 pieces of each of them. I made a sale of 14 pieces of software. But you know, we didn't say, oh no, there's a minimum order of 500 or whatever. We just said, okay. And so we'd ship them 2 pieces of every title, and they sold so fast because they were so attractive, and people, you know, were kind of curious about the software. It was expensive. It was about $35 a piece, even back in 1983. But they sold through so quickly that then the follow-up orders from the retailers were, you know, much larger quantities. And that's how we spread. Every one of us, we had 6, I think, well, there were 6 co-founders, 6 of us divided up the country and went to regions and sold directly in. And that's how we got started with it. Wow. We also did, as you said, no advertising on television or radio, but we made a big, we spent a lot of money creating a print ad that was quite unique in at the time, because it set the context for what our corporate ID was going to be. And the title of the advertisement, a double-page spread, so it was expensive. We put it in Newsweek and Scientific American. The title of the ad was, "Can a Computer Make You Cry?" And the text of the ad was really, really interesting. It was unusual. It was talking about, you know, software worthy of the minds that use it. It was talking about creating a language of dreams. We were, and it was actually written by a company, an advertising agency that we had helped get going. Gordon had been in an advertising business out of Stanford Business School, and he joined us from advertising. And he talked to a couple of friends that he knew and said, look, if you'll start an advertising agency, we will support you for your first year. We'll be your first client. And we have enough, we're going to spend enough money that it's going to be worth it we can support you as you can get started. And it was 3 guys, Rich Silverstein, Jeff Goodby, and Andy Berlin. And so it was Goodby, Silverstein, Berlin, I believe was the name of the thing. It turned out they wrote the ad copy, and it was just fantastic. We had a big photo on the double-page spread of our artists, the programmers that did the made the products, that coded the products. And it was in a very thoughtful pose that was created by a famous Los Angeles photographer. We flew all of our artists into San Francisco and flew the guy up from LA. I think this is just off the top of my head, I don't remember what it was, but it was something like $50,000 just to create the ad. I don't know how much the ad cost to run in these big consumer magazines, but it was a striking ad, and it set the tone for the company from then on. We were unusual at the time. Yeah.
So you were like interviewing every provider, and those artists, like programmers, you were kind of making them look as rock stars, right?
Yeah, well, you know, in the days when you had vinyl records, the record albums that people, you know, created usually had liner notes, what were called liner notes. And a lot of times they were critics or something, you know, writing about the music, or sometimes it was the artist, the musician himself, the band or something commenting about the album they made. Well, so we adopted that as a strategy. And so the either the backs of the cardboard package that the 5 1/4-inch floppy disk went in, or we made it a twofold, so that there were liner notes on each package that were interviews with the software artists. They talked about why they wrote, what they hoped people got out of their game, what they, you know, I don't think they gave away any secrets to how to play the game, but it was a personal message, if you will, to consumers from the people who actually wrote the software, and that was an unusual thing, but it was what made us stand out. And yeah, it worked really well for quite a number of years. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. And Jeff, we're trying to leave 20 minutes for people to ask questions. So before getting into that,
yeah,
I think that everyone wants to know, like, can you remind us what's the tagline everyone knows today? And
yeah.
how you guys came up with that idea?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. It's an inside story, if you will. We organized originally our producers. We had producers that managed the development, the finishing touches of the product, and then the packaging and the marketing. Well, you know, we've got we divided the company organized the company into studios. They'd focus on various aspects. You know, strategy games, sports games, I don't know, other categories. But the sports got so big that the sports studio got so big that we, in the early, kind of mid 90s, 94 or something like that, we decided it needed to be its own division, because it was just it was taking up too much. It needed focus totally on just sports. So we created the sports division. And the group that did that, I believe we were involved were Don Transith and Don Traeger, 2 Dons, and a guy named Jeff Odiorn. And they had large staffs. We were $1 billion company by the time EA Sports as a division was created. And so they spent time trying to figure out, come up with a tagline. They were all great marketing guys, and they spent, you know, a few weeks to launch the division. They wanted to have a tagline, and the one that they ended up basically agreeing on after the couple of weeks of brainstorming and that kind of thing was the following. It was the spitting image of sports. And on the morning that it was a Friday morning, they were going to make the commitment to do all of the, you know, create all the marketing materials around the spitting image of sports for the EA Sports. Jeff Odiorn was taking a shower, preparing for work, and in the shower, it struck him that it would be much. That he came up with a thought that was simpler and catchier, and it was EA Sports. It's in the game, and of course he didn't say it like that, but he came to the office, talked to Don and the other staffers that had been working on the spitting image of sports, and they all agreed, oh no, that's a much better tagline. And so they did a pivot immediately. And as I say, the company was about $1 billion company at the time, and yet these guys had the organizational structure of the company allowed them to make that kind of switch on a dime and change course in terms of what they were going to how they were going to market the division and all, with just some eureka kind of idea. That was really kind of interesting and good for a large company like that. $1 billion company usually doesn't turn on a dime, but Electronic Arts allowed enough independence in their divisions or in their studios. Sorry?
I said like $1 billion company in revenue, not in valuation.
In revenue. So, but I don't remember what the valuation was back then. I'm sure it was more than $1 billion, but we were $1 billion company. I had over 2,000 employees at the time, and that just those size companies rarely can make quick decisions. But
wow, that's amazing. Wow, what a learning also how to how with an idea everyone can just change and set up all the machine for something that came out with on a shower, right?
Yeah, it requires a continuous open mind and an ability to think outside the box. And when you find something that really clicks right, you pursue it. You make a decision and you run with it. And that's what seems so hard for so many companies to do in their efforts to market themselves. We were a marketing company, and I think that for many, many years, in fact, still, I'd say in a lot of ways, that's a skill set that we have pursued and refined over the years. But yeah, you've got to keep your mind wide open to this kind of stuff.
Oh, 100%. So Jeff, here Blake Isaacs asks, how did you, with a marketing background, ensure that the coders tech people understood your mission and desire to convey feelings through the games EA created?
Okay, so one of the ways that we did that most effectively was we had we developed a company culture that just continually encouraged everybody to talk with everybody else. We had a mandatory company meeting every Friday night, at which time we would everybody would gather. All the executives would stand up in front of the company and answer questions from anybody. We'd talk about issues that the company was facing, and as part of developing that culture, we would back then you had to rent we wanted our employees to see the most current popular movies like Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark and that kind of stuff. And so we would rent out a full movie theater and take the whole company for a morning during the week to see a movie, just so that we could keep them up to speed on the sort of current state of popular culture. And then we'd talk about it. The other thing that we did in this culture was until we had about 100 people, and that was the first few years. We didn't have 100 people until maybe year 3. I don't know. We would have every employee that we hired, every applicant for a position in the company was forced to interview with every employee in the company, no matter what level they were. If we had a warehouse guy that we were hiring, everybody in the company interviewed him. If we did hire a VP of sales in our second year, we had to remove the one we first got. And in our second year, we hired a VP of sales. Everybody in the company, including the warehouse workers, interviewed the VP of sales. So what that did, it eventually became impossible to sustain because of the logistics and the numbers. But toward the end, people were spending weeks interviewing at Electronic Arts in order to meet with all the people. And so it was time consuming, but what it produced was a consistency of attitude and thinking that made it so much easier to operate the company. And the benefit of that was that when somebody was applying for a job at Electronic Arts and they had to interview with 70 people over a period of 6 weeks, or I wasn't 6 weeks, but it, a long period of time in order to get the job. When they finally got it, they felt like it made the applicant feel like, I must be the smartest, best person in the world. I got in after 70 interviews. And it made the employees who had to take, if you weren't related to the subject area where an applicant was trying to get into the company, you were required to have at least a 15-minute interview with each employee that was applying for any job. So they weren't in depth, but it made the employees who spent some time talking with everybody that was applying for any job, they felt like they were contributing in a great way to what it was the company was building, the atmosphere, the kinds of people that we were bringing in. They felt like they had a say in that, and it made them feel wonderful about the people we were bringing in. It made the people we were bringing in feel great about the company. It was a win-win situation. And we're not the only company that's done that, by the way, but it was certainly one of the things that we did that I thought stands out in my memory over the last 30 years as a way that we built a company where everybody was on the same page in terms of attitude and drive and ambition and all of that.
That's awesome. It's a lot about culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And here, James Kosak asks, as a marketer, what 2 or 3 things do you want to hear from prospective agency partners?
What 2 or 3 things does Electronic Arts want to hear from prospective agency partners?
Yeah, or you. I mean, you personally, like, what's your expectation while hearing a prospective agency partner?
Well, I do believe that it's very valuable for agencies to be able to exploit large, huge databases of information in order to glean what's popular, what the marketplace is responding to. But I think that I would request a sample of the creative capability of an agency. Who are their creative people? What are how do they express themselves? Because it varies, of course, across different agencies, but I think the creative team really needs to be the lead for me. And I think it was back in, well, we had Goodby Silverstein for many years. So we weren't shopping around for new agencies for a long time. But they were, we were on the same wavelength with them, or they with us. So that's a requirement for any agency, I believe, in dealing with a company, especially a startup company.
Yeah, nice. And Jeff, here, there's another question that says, your product was unique at that time. How to explain a product or service that nobody knows? What were the main learnings?
Well, that's true. It was very hard. We tried. Oh my God, we tried target groups. We in order to try to figure out whether a game that we thought was good, if we try to get in front of people and hear what they thought about it. But the fact of the matter was, nobody played these kinds of games before, so they didn't know what to expect. They didn't have firm opinions, but they didn't have much comparison to make. So it turned out that focus groups were wasted. The conclusion of a focus group was rarely correlated with the success of a product, and it's because nobody knew what to expect. I think that I see that problem right now in the virtual reality gaming industry. As nascent as it is, it's very hard to explain to anybody, the experience of putting on a headset and stepping into virtual reality and interacting with others. That's a very hard thing to do. So it's never easy, but somehow or another you kind of work your way through. What's happened in the interim or since then is that, you know, with mobile games and that kind of stuff, you can build, you can pay for a large group of like thousands and thousands of people to play your game, and you can monitor how they're playing it in real time and get their feedback at the time. So that it's a much easier now with the internet to gauge how people are reacting to your products, or at least our games. And I think any products need that kind of investigation with large crowds of people to see how they play, how they you know, how they reach people, how they spark emotions from people.
Jeff, and how did you, I'm coming with another question here from Jose. He says, Jeff, how did you know that you were approaching the product in the right way? What made you realize that the approach was perhaps missing?
The approach. Well, we spent all the time in our various studios with the producers, brainstorming about what they thought was, you know, the next style or the next, you know, topic that needed to be, that could best be addressed in the gaming world. So we were talking about it all the time. So our approach, you know, we got to the point where we kind of understood, we felt like we understood the right approach to take with everything that we saw that was submitted. Because we were still having people submit products to us, and they were lots of times unfinished, and so we began to learn. We hired brilliant people for one thing, and we really learned fast how to handle what kind of product was appropriate for turning into one of our winning titles, and what kind of product probably wouldn't ever. You know, it was lots of gut feeling. Bing Gordon was a brilliant guy. He was the one member of our 6 co-founders that stayed at the company for over 27 years. The rest of us were gone within the first 9 years. Then Bing was alone and he stayed for 27 something years. And he's now at Kleiner Perkins as a partner in doing investments. But he has this brilliant mind that can really identify, you know, good stuff from junk. And so he kind of was the chief. He held his title for about probably 15 of the 27 years or longer was chief creative officer.
Yeah.
So he could go around and pronounce his opinions on all sorts of products that were when they're in the house, you know, being developed or tried to being refined and that kind of stuff. They'd always get Bing's opinion on stuff. Yeah.
And Jeff, I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
And one is, who taught the retailers on how to introduce your products to the end customer?
Who taught the retailers?
Yeah.
That's a good question too, because retailers weren't ready for this kind of stuff. They didn't know what to do with software and gaming and that kind of stuff. What we ended up doing was in places like, well, we made our own, what would you call it? Our own merchandising piece of hardware where it was like a rack or a shelving, I'd say, that we made with all of our own logos and design and that kind of stuff, and we highlighted our products in that shelving area, and then we had a place to store the products in the shelving area, so that the retailer didn't have to think about how was he going to show off these products. We had to do it for them. Really, we had to provide all this stuff for free, to help the products move through. Yeah, so it was training retailers on how to present something is a huge pain in the butt, and nowadays, of course, and we've developed really close relationships with our retailers. Our relationships were great. We had Toys R Us, we had Walmart. Believe me, selling to Walmart is a horrible experience. And it's just, it makes you feel like nothing, you go into their headquarters in Arkansas, and you have to sit in these windowless white rooms, tiny things, and they make you wait forever for a buyer to come in. And the buyers are very matter of fact, very good. You've got to really, it's not a fun experience at all, but we managed to do it. And then we had such, we put a lot of effort into our retail relationships. And part of the issue that gave us some pause after the internet came along was that we built great retail relationships. Well, with the internet's entry into the whole scene, retailers stopped being so important. Toys R Us is out of business now. I mean, so the whole market just kind of changed. And we were kind of behind on things because we needed those retailers we built good relationships with them. We needed for them to continue to promote our products and to stock them and to show them off. And of course they did well with them. So they did that. Then we got the internet and people stopped buying in a store so much. And so we had to change our strategy.
Right. And Jeff, last question, and I'm sure I left this one for the very end because I'm sure that most of people are wondering, like, hey, Jeff and like EA Sports has proven its ability to survive to a lot of changes and within like this long journey. So could you sum up in just one phrase any recommendation that you will give to any entrepreneur, agency, client, brand, whatever, to adapt SAP considering coronavirus?
Sorry, let me, to adapt SAP?
Yeah, I mean, no. Yeah.
SAP?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you need to, what recommendation would you give a company to adapt immediately, considering coronavirus?
I keep going over in my mind what is a good answer to that. I don't know. That's very hard.
Is there something very quick that you can think on a strategy that you'd use to survive any crisis you had?
Yeah, you've got to have enough confidence in yourself to be resilient through all of the tough times, and this is a tough time. So resiliency is primary, and you got to keep remembering that it's all about emotional issues. We are emotional beings, but you've got to stay with, you've got to believe in yourself enough to get through the times that people feel like are sketchy or where things that seem like they're falling apart. We had to do that on numerous occasions, and I think it's really valuable just to stick with your knitting. That's a phrase in English that's not a great one, but anyway, it means just follow your passion and stay with it. Yeah.
Well, great, Jeff. So sorry for the questions that we didn't get to answer. Please send them to info@projectcore.com. We can share them with Jeff and then give you a call back. And to anyone that wants to hear the next podcast, video podcasts, you can, apart from going to Spotify and iTunes, you can subscribe here to this channel on YouTube and just receive our news. So Jeff, thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate a lot of learnings. Is there any message or thing you want to end up with?
First of all, thank you, Santiago, for giving me the chance to talk with you, because it's always fun for me to go over what we have today. It's probably nothing that new to your audience, but there are some lessons that we learned that I always like to share. In terms of any final advice or something, I have to just say that we will get over this current period, and you can't afford to let your fears take over. We're going to be fine, and certainly in the video game industry, it's a great time because people are staying at home. But that's the industry. That's specific to the industry. But mostly, I just feel like people need to understand that times will change and get better.
Right. Amazing. Jeff, congratulations again for what you did. Of course, you don't need me to say that. But thanks. You know that as for this podcast and as a friend, I truly admire you, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here and for giving us your learnings.
My pleasure.
Okay. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Ciao.